Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking to members of Occupy the SEC who were laying out ways that Wall Street can get around the Volcker Rule as it stands to engage in the exact same practices that they were before the financial crisis. They got us into the crisis in the first place. The exact same kind of practices that the Volcker Rule is supposed to eliminate, prohibit, get rid of. Now let's hear what the banks are saying, despite all this, about what is wrong with the Volcker Rule. I want to bring back Alexis Goldstein. She's a former Wall Street technology VP, member of Occupy the SEC, obviously, as is Caitlin Klein, who's also a former derivatives trader. So, ladies, you know, we heard some of your key arguments about what's wrong with this legislation as it stands. Let's hear what the banks are saying, because they're saying that despite all of these problems and loopholes, that this will reduce liquidity, which basically means it would increase financial volatility. They're saying big picture, this would hurt the entire financial system. It would hurt the economy. My question to you is, why would it reduce liquidity? Couldn't new companies come in and provide the services that the banks now have a monopoly over?
Well, I think that's a big part of our argument, and that's one of the things that we cite in our letter, is that there was actually an anti-competitive lawsuit that was filed by a company called Intervest that was way back in like the late 90s, and they actually tried to make the bond market electronic. And they were essentially kept out of that market, and they tried to get that put onto Bloomberg, and all the dealers allegedly and not united against that and said there's no way you can allow this to happen because this is a very profitable market for us that we want to keep on the phone. And so our argument is essentially that sense that liquidity will dry up does not have legs and is almost laughable, because this is such a highly profitable business for the banks. Of course they don't want to lose it, and people would be thrilled to dive into this market. They just haven't been able to because the banks and these big bulge bracket firms have a stranglehold on the entire market.
Right, and there's also this extension of this thought that is implying that somehow the proprietary trading is the most important part for the liquidity. We already have an exemption for market making. You can continue to do these liquidity providing activities. That's in there. The idea that somehow they need to proprietary trade in order to efficiently provide liquidity doesn't seem to really add up. So I think, you know, it's pretty clear that the banks are trying to take this and say, we need to keep this very profitable business for us, or it will ruin the economy. And this is the only way that they can kind of make those two things be connected, through this idea that if liquidity drives up, it's going to affect individuals' bank accounts. And it's just such a disingenuous argument to say that these two things are even remotely related.
Right, and just sticking on this topic for a second, kind of because this is a key part of your argument, you know, we hear a lot about entrepreneurship in the U.S. In Silicon Valley. You have these startups that are very successful. You have businesses popping up where there's a demand, and then maybe they crush another business. Amazon coming in to meet that demand, and then, you know, putting Barnes & Noble out of business. You do not hear that a lot in the banking sector. How can it really benefit by being opened up?
Well, I think you're right. I think that sort of in the States we're sort of known for entrepreneurship, and there really isn't a whole lot of competition in the financial sector. And it's really set up in such a way that small guys don't really have a chance against these big players, and they like it that way. And so this idea that they're arguing that this will ruin the economy, like, these guys are just trying to protect their bottom line. And that's really what it's about at the end of the day.
So then that brings me to this question. Earlier today on CNBC, I saw Meredith Whitney. She's obviously a very well-known analyst. She was talking about how regulation has gone too far in the other direction, in the sense that we're regulating too much. Now the middle class is getting squeezed out of the banking system as an unintended consequence. Is that the problem? Or is it that regulations are written in a way that benefits the big guys at the expense of the small guys or new entrants that want to get in to banking or the financial sector?
So I think that the big banks are really, really good at this thing that we call regulatory arbitrage. And the idea of that is essentially you have a team of lawyers, you have a team of structurers, they read the rule, they read the law, and they figure out, how do I abide by the rule but get around the intent of the rule? And Wall Street is really good at that, and because Wall Street has so much money, they have the firepower and the numbers in order to do that. And I think the reason that maybe what, you know, Meredith Whitney is referring to is that smaller entrants smaller companies don't have armies of lawyers and armies of structurers to figure out how to dodge these regulations. So it's sort of an unfair fight. But Wall Street sort of lobbied to make the Volcker Rule more complex. And now they're complaining that the Volcker Rule is too complex, but it's complex because they lobbied so hard to make it complex. And so I guess I see what she's saying in the sense that small businesses don't have that much of a chance against regulation because they can't engineer their way around it. But Wall Street can, and they've been doing it for a really long time.
And we're almost out of time, but that brings me to one final question I have to ask, because you ladies pored over the 530-page bill, read every single line of it. It's, you know, a bloated bill by every account. How many pages could it afford to lose? How long should this bill be?
Well, so just, it's not a bill, it's the regulation.
The regulation,
right? So the bill was
me.
Dodd-Frank, right. I don't know.
I think they could do it in 20 pages or less easily.
20 pages or less. Well, that's a good note to end on. Ladies, I really appreciate you being here on the show to break this all down for us. It's such an important issue that you guys have been doing amazing work on. That was Alexis Goldstein and Caitlin Klein, both members of Occupy the SEC. All right, before we go, let's break things down with our own team now. I want to bring in Dimitri Kofinas, our producer, here in the studio, and Shannon Donahoe in the control room to talk about this. So we know Greece is not in the clear. They're still racing to make reforms, and there was fresh bad news today of a downgrade.
According to the ratings definition that Fitch has given us, a C rating indicates a quote-unquote high default risk. I'm reading verbatim.
There's a darn good chance you're not going to get paid.
A real possibility. C ratings signal imminent default. So at least from a
All right, so there's that. You have the Eurogroup in this context who wants Greek authorities to introduce over the next couple months in the Greek legal framework a provision ensuring that priority for getting paid is granted to debt servicing payments, that their creditors get paid before anybody else. We've heard Wolfgang Schäuble talk about how Greece should postpone its elections perhaps, and maybe a technocratic government needs to be imposed. We heard that recently. Dimitri has an interesting idea about where this could be headed and why.
All right, so this might sound like improbable, but if you think about it, 100 years ago in the U.S., we took away markets determining interest rates and we gave it to central banks.
That's right.
And people just got comfortable with that idea, and now people just think it's crazy that the market would determine the interest rate, that they would price it.
It's normal. Nobody,
it's normal.
People think, and the Fed, that's crazy. The market setting interest rates, that's crazy. Not our guess, but maybe mainstream conventional wisdom.
So all these years, we've also been used to the idea that the markets or individuals price elections through their votes, right? But now we've got technocrats in Greece. We have a technocrat in Greece. We have a technocrat in Italy, and they've suspended elections. And I think that there's a legitimate possibility, I mean, this is a legitimate risk, that we could see these technocratic administrations just continue to roll over and roll over, because the longer you don't have elections and the longer you keep technocrats in place, like in Greece, the more difficult it becomes to return to elections, because politicians become increasingly scared. Because as we see in Greece, the polls show that the electorate is becoming radicalized. So that the longer you keep them out of the electoral process, the more likely it is that when they do re-enter, they're going to vote all the centrists out, and they're going to put in the most radical parties, like in Greece, where
which we've heard a number of guests talk about, and that far-right Greek party that now has enough support that it could get into parliament. So what we're seeing, you're saying that this could be a new normal where central banking technocracy, as that became the accepted norm, we now see democratic functions become accepted as technocracy and a technocratic function.
Because the same exact argument that is made in the banking sector, which is the market's great until the market fails, and then we have to step in and take over. Same thing is being used in democracy. Democracy is great, but it's too volatile. So let's suspend democracy for now, because it's just too volatile.
It's great until we need to do something that the people don't want us to do, and then we need technocrats. Yeah, it's a good point. Shannon, you want to throw anything in there?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay.
Dimitri has Greece all wrapped up.
That's true. So let's move on to this, because I know this is a story that you will want to say something about. We got to have time for that. So a new study has named the most corrupt city in the U.S. Can you guess what it is? Here's a hint.
Come on, baby, don't you want to go?
He doesn't sound as good as he normally sounds. I'm usually a little more wooed by his tunes. But Obama's hometown, where 1 year ago today, former White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel was elected mayor, Chicago is the most corrupt city. A study, University of Illinois, says it's cost $500 million to the city corruption. It's essentially a corruption tax on citizens. Whoever said that Greece is not analogous to the U.S., just look at Chicago.
I don't think Greece is that bad. I don't think Greece is that bad. Shannon, you come from around that area, close there. What do you think? What's your opinion on Chicago?
Well, of course, this isn't Chicago specific, but if you look at how many governors the state of Illinois has in jail, which most of them came from the Chicago regime.
The regime, the Chicago regime, I love it.
I think it pretty much, I mean, I think it can compare to Greece maybe in the future when
Come
all
on,
these
it's not that-
technocrats
Greece is not
may
as
be
bad as
going to
Chicago,
jail. Who
Shannon.
knows?